Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint something that my patrons have asked for me to do, which is a lovely scene of a large harvest moon over a dark landscape. And this has been so much fun to paint, really useful in terms of learning about washes, glazes, water control, and then how surprisingly silhouettes aren't necessarily just a pure black thing to paint on top. So grab your paints and let's get started. You could either use a compass, or if you've got something good to draw around, use that. I like the size of this sellotape roll. That feels really perfect. I've also taped down the sides of my A5 size piece of paper. A5 is roughly 6 by 8 inches. And then I suppose the other thing I can do is just sort of mark out where I'm going to have a tree sort of coming across the moon. But other than that, we don't need much, and we'll give it a little roll with our kneadable eraser, which doesn't feel very cylindrical right now. It's trundling along. And I am going to use my mop brush to do a nice wash over the piece, but first I need to get some colours woken up. So I've got my nice little spray, and I just want some of the sort of the moon glowy colours, and ironically we're not going to yet be using the colour that's called moon glow. So I'm going to get some raw sienna, some buff titanium, and we're going to start with a nice sort of glowing set. And actually, no, I think about it, we do need some kind of low light, so let me get my moon glow. And what I'm going to do is, yeah, like I said, I'm going to give this a light wash of water, and what I want to do is to get the moon painted in, but on a wet page, because I want the colour to spread outwards beyond it. So I'm going to paint my moon with very dilute colour, and it's going to have a glow to it. And the reason we're painting the moon is, as I've been particularly drawn to how many amazing sort of colourful moons we've had over the summer. Harvest moons, blood moons, been amazing. And then I'm just going to draw in some colour. Let's pop a few blotches on. And I want that glow to really spread across the piece, and actually I'm just going to place in a little bit of it down here. Now we need to let that dry 100%. I'll just place in a few tiny little bit. Okay, that feels like a good general loose watercolour moon. We're going to let that dry, and then we can start with our general ambient surroundings. I've let that dry, and even though it's faded, I can still see those lovely textures. And now I've got some quite dilute Payne's grey, and then down in the separate well I've got green gold, deep sap green and raw umber. And I'm going to begin by first checking my brush is clean. It is. I'm going to take some Payne's grey, and I'm going to start to paint around the edge of the moon. I've got to work fast with this, and I'm just going to start cleaning my brush off and start to draw the wetness in. And then as I get closer, I just want to be really careful that I get right up to the edge of the moon, and that very subtle colour difference means that we've got a lovely sense of the moon glowing in the night sky, and then I'm just going to frame it a little bit more with some more of that darkness. And then coming down, I'm going to just let the colour sort of fade out on the brush, just wetting the page essentially. And then, do you remember we had some of the glow of the gold down here? Well, I'm going to just take some clean water and really sort of remove too much paint. And then I'm going to take some deep sap green and start to place in the beginnings of some pine trees in the distance. Now this is going to feather out and become almost sort of unrecognizable as any kind of pine tree, but it's amazing how your brain will accept that there is some kind of piney forest there. And as the page slowly dries, I'm actually going to bring in a bit of the green gold down in the front. And then the raw umber, because we're just creating a foreground that has captured the glow of the moon. And we're going to let it all dry, and it's going to change. It's going to change so much as it dries. It'll lighten, it'll spread, all sorts of things are going to happen. But it's very important to just let it do that. I'm going to add just a little bit extra of the dark Payne's grey just to sort of try and frame it a little bit. But we're going to let that all dry. Now this is dried, I bet you're feeling like, oh, this feels like the ugly stage. Well, don't worry, because what we're going to do now is we're going to take some really dilute moon glow and we're going to do a wash over the whole piece apart from the moon. So we're just going to intensify the colours that we've already got. Oh, what's that? A bit of fluff. And I'm going to try again and paint this sort of as smoothly as possible. These large round brushes are fantastic. I highly recommend adding one of these to your kit because it just is so useful for when you need to just cover a large area but still be able to have a little bit of control. And what I love about this is it's really tying everything together. And like I say, adding a layer of moon glow. But again, I'm just going to leave that unpainted down there, and I will just sort of gently just sort of blend that colour a little bit. Now, of course, we've got a wet page again. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to just sort of leave it a few extra seconds. But I know the page isn't as wet as last time because we were just doing like a quick coverage. And this time I've got a much thicker deep sap green, and this time I'm going to build up my forest again. And you see this time it's still feathering out, but I can get just a little bit more detail on these trees. Still sort of leaving it a lot to the spread of the water on the page, allowing this to happen. But I'm also going to take some Payne's grey I want there to be some sort of shadowy trees in amongst there. And I can just sort of start to slowly build this piece up now that the page is wet, but it's not as wet as it was, and we've got this lovely extra colour of the moon glow. And what helps with this softness is it gives a sense of trees in the distance, and we're going to contrast that with a tree in the foreground, which is going to be super duper crisp. Now I'm sort of scrubbing my brush a little bit, sort of angling it very low to the page and starting to almost get a little bit of unpainted space sort of on these drier bits. And I'm just sort of attempting to create a sort of some kind of connection between this foreground area and these distant trees. Now I've done that, I'm going to take some of my warm earthy tones. I've got raw umber here. And what I'd really like to do is, there we go, start to build up a little bit of texture and a little bit more crispness and detail underneath the moon. So I'm just going to try and keep it light and create some of these grasses. I'm still using like quite a large brush, so it's quite an expressive, quite loose feel to it still. It's not really detailed, but there's just something a bit contrasting, and you feel like the moon is just catching the tops. So I quite like the idea of bringing some of the dark colour down in underneath. So I'll just see, I'm really pleased with this, and I think that at the beginning it felt like, oh my goodness, where's this going to go? And now it's really starting to take shape. So I'm going to leave it to dry 100%, and then we can put in some lovely crisp details over the front. We've got it nice and dry once again, and now I'm going to focus in on some slightly more crisp details. We're going to put a tree in, and just because it's in silhouette does not mean that it doesn't have nuance in the colour. So I've got burnt sienna and Payne's grey really sort of darkened down, and I'm going to have my tree sort of come out of here, and I've got a size 2 brush to begin with, but it's going to quite soon be too big. So I'm going to go down to, whoops, a size 0. That's better, more control. And you can see how actually that colour is quite dilute, quite light, and it means that even now we've got room for nuance and light and shade, and quite soon even my size 1 brush is going to be too big, but I am going to put in just a few extra thicker branches. And now I think it's time for the rigger brush. I'm going to take a little bit more colour on the brush, and I'm going to have a bit of fun placing in lots of nice fine detailed branches, and the whole point is that the branches are going to come across the moon. We're going to put leaves on it as well. Now, how do you draw tree branches? Well, the way I like to think of it is thinking about how they're going to grow naturally towards the sun. Things sort of, they grow out and up, and you always seem to have your last branch kind of making one last effort to get up to the moon or the sun. And so that's how I tend to work it. And also that really you can never have too many extra little branches on the ends of the big branches. I want to put in like a second tree trunk. And we're going to work it into the piece, but the second tree trunk isn't necessarily going to end up in the piece all that much, but it just feels like it wants a little extra something. So I'm just going to get my tree trunks how I want them. All full of branches, and then we can add a few leaves. So I'm just using the same mix and a size 0 brush, and trying to be not too consistent with leaf placement. So what I don't want is for there to just be like a general coverage of leaves that feels like the same across the board. I want there to be little like clusters, sparse bits. And I'm just using the brush to sort of curl and the simple little brush stroke, but I'm not doing a perfect leaf shape every time. Sometimes it's just little dabs. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look down here. I want to make a little more of the ground and the area. So I'm going to take some of my green gold and just work that in a little bit and get some of my earthy tones. And first sort of work on little highlights here and there, because then what I want to do is take some really dark colour and really try and sort of ground these trees as well. Just sort of get them a bit more bedded in to the landscape. So now I can use the rigger brush both with the warm earthy tones and the heavier darker shades, and just start to get a little bit more nuance into the piece, and also just to get a little bit of framing going on down around the edges. I always like to bring in some slightly sort of taller grasses, but I also think it's important to get a few of those grasses with the golden colour too, just to remind us that the moon is really lighting up things. And that leads me to add just that little bit extra darkness to the back sort of sides of this smaller tree for sure. And we're going to let this all dry, rub out the pencil, and then we're going to come back for one or two last little details. So I've rubbed all the pencil out, pulled the tape off, and now, just for one last little detail or two, I want to place in a little bird just flying across. And the funny thing with birds is, I think the less you try and create what you think is a perfect bird, the better it'll be. Because birds can be quite difficult, but I'll just try and scribble it a little bit. And I think we're done. I think that's good. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, we have so many seasonal tutorials. Autumn is such an inspiring time. We've got autumn leaves, we've got mushrooms, toadstools, we've got landscapes, we've got cozy, cute little things. Just check out the rest of the channel. There's so much there. And if you want even more, you can support us over on Patreon, where we have 5 years worth of exclusive tutorials for you. So you can head to the episode notes below for all the sign up information there and join us over there. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and share your paintings on social media. Tag us at De Winton Paper Co, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!